Welcome to Indefinable Magic. Musings, witterings, drivel, delete as appropriate, inspired by an aspect of a piece of disposable, child-friendly entertainment, Doctor Who, that seems to have got a bit carried away with itself. Written and presented by me, Toby Haydoke. In these bite-sized editions, the musings, witterings and drivel will be provoked by a single watch of the disposable child-friendly entertainment's very latest episode. And so, tonight's instalment of Indefinable Magic Bite Size, after 73 yards, written by Russell T Davies, is called Fear Herself. Witchcraft is a very strong word. The airing of 73 yards at midnight, an apposite time in more ways than one, came shortly after I'd been watching some Doctor Who from the other Series 1. Episode 4 of The Keys of Marinus is called The Snows of Terror, and it is notable for not having Doctor Who in it, and, as I messaged my friend Johnny jokingly afterwards, it was proper Doctor Who, in which you could imply sexual assault, before the show got all woke. For the uninitiated, the monster of the week in The Snows of Terror is a beardy bloke called Vassor, who tries to have his wicked way with Barbara Wright. It's not the programme's greatest episode, perhaps, The Snows of Terror, and yet the Fifth Doctor himself, Peter Davison, once cited it as a petrifying memory. The revivified ice soldiers coming back to life being one of his most vivid, scary, behind-the-sofa-set childhood recollections. It was so terrifying, The Snows of Terror, that it terrified Doctor Who himself. Perhaps that's why he wasn't in it. Since 73 Yards aired, I've been trying to remember what actually scared me, gave me nightmares as a kid. Because I have a confession to make. I don't think it was Doctor Who. No, Doctor Who excited me, thrilled me, twanged my geekometer. But was I ever scared? Did I watch from behind the sofa? I'm not so sure. I'll tell you the scariest thing I ever saw as a kid. I remember a drama documentary that had previously, the paper said, been banned. This is why I watched it. It was like a missing episode. It was called The War Game, a Doctor Who-sounding title, but it was as far removed from groovy military kidnap aliens with funky facial hair as you could imagine. It was released from the vaults as part of a, get this, nuclear holocaust season on the BBC at the height of the Cold War. I know, inform, educate, scatter bloody death. Made by groundbreaking director Peter Watkins, this was an extraordinary faux documentary, shot in stark, grainy, newsreel black and white. The film cameraman was the Abominable Snowman's Peter Bartlett. It depicted Britain before, during and after a nuclear attack. It seemed so real, but made back in the 60s, so, crucially for me, watching in 1985, it was from the past, that scary old place made of monochrome and full of dead people. I see dead people, but largely because I watch old telly a lot. But we had loads of old books too, with black and white pictures in them, of the now long dead staring out at you accusingly, berating you for intruding, rubbernecking upon their long-lost existence. I always found such evidence of life, those captured snippets of the long dead, to be strange and unsettling. The War Game was more recent, though, but still old enough to be disquieting, and the blunt, to-camera verite feel of the whole thing made it all scarily plausible. In striving to be deliberately undramatic, it had the most dramatic effect possible. I didn't sleep that night. I was genuinely, sickeningly terrified. The War Game had no monsters or special effects, no eerie music or shock moments, no sudden scares. The documentary style, that skewed realism, made it all too recognisable, yet terribly disturbing. But it didn't have any fancy elements. It wasn't a scary film. But boy, it was perturbing. The mundane presentation depicting the ultimate apocalypse, that's what was the killer. Like a dispassionate voice telling you that you're going to die, or a geek describing how they're going to dismember you, or a child's voice coming from a gas mask asking for its mummy. Familiar, but strange. Abnormal. And 73 yards was abnormal from the start. No opening titles to reassure us that this was the same show we watched last week. Oh, you think, there weren't... Didn't they just... Oh, that's odd. Take the familiar. Make it seem disconcerting. That's what folk horror does. That's what it's all about. Proper scary takes the familiar and it doesn't turn it upside down. It just skews it a little bit. Makes it slightly off, out in the corner of your eye. If you want to really disturb someone, don't smash their house up. Just move everything in it ever so slightly, just so it looks off. That'll freak him out. Don't ask how I know this. I remember the brouhaha with the 1999 hit film The Blair Witch Project. Hard to believe now, but it was so talked about at the time, and so effective. A found footage mystery that offered no explanations. It made itself disconcerting using just a few clever tricks, mostly its found footage element. Like the war game, it purported to be reality, and the most effective, memorable part of it for me, just at the end, when we see one character, Michael the cameraman, just standing in the corner, facing away from us. Simple. Actor in corner. No blood, no jumping out, no special effects. And it's the most haunting bit of the whole film. And that's the brilliance of 73 Yards' approach to bewitching us. The threat is just a woman. Rather like the woman in black in Susan Hill's enduring, haunting, foreboding story of the same name, or Michael Myers lurking on street corners, boiler-suited, blank-faced, but nothing else, in Halloween. Throughout 73 Yards, there's an indistinct woman out of the corner of Ruby's eye. We don't hear her talk. There are no threats. There's no shouting. But we see the effect she has on people. And that's enough. And that's what Doctor Who does so well. And the little signs the woman is doing. What a fantastic directorial touch of many. We don't know what they are, but they are discernible yet indistinct enough to be slightly unnerving. And the repetition, well, that makes them more so. Silence, movement, repetition. We get all of these things all the time, every day. Yet their placement and context in this episode of Doctor Who, well, they're so effective. We often associate horror of this kind with bleak landscapes, and the lolling tree that the woman stands under is a beautiful, again, slightly jarring image of this kind. And yet, 73 Yards transports that woman, then, to a modern street, in the day, glimpsed from a train window, divorced from her helpful geographical associations with gloomy folklore and ancient mystery, and still she's terrifying. She's your vampiric, undead, supernatural Yeti on your Lewin Tooting Beck. Something otherworldly, shattering and discombobulating the recognisable world. It's like our technological, advanced, modern, safe times have somehow cracked and let in those that are full of superstition, horror, and the silent, walking, disturbing dead. So all bets are off. Mum, I'm scared. I remember writing a school essay. We'd been told to come up with a horror story. Oh, now this was going to be easy. Oh, I could nick wantonly from Doctor Who and no one would ever know. I didn't imagine my English teacher kicking back at home with the VHS of Pyramids of Mars or the Target novel of the Demons. So I scribbled out the story of a shipwrecked sailor who came to a sticky end thanks to something with an unnerving heartbeat and slick, wet, saline fronds lurking in the darkness. When I described his demise at the conclusion, I etched out a tortuously detailed paragraph spelling out that his killer was an intelligent seaweed thrashing beneath the foamy water. For those struggling to catch up at the back, I'd stolen it from Fury from the Deep. My teacher, I remember, remonstrated with me for offering too much description and explanation. In doing so, I'd actually ruined all of that atmosphere that I'd carefully built up. Now, that's not to entirely excuse storytelling that is too oblique, but do we really need to know what the mysterious woman said in 73 Yards that alarmed people so? It's such a horrifying, beautifully economic piece of drama. She says something so unnerving that her interrogator turns on their heels and runs. So simple. An exchange, a look, a run. For a series that has tried to make so many everyday things scary, to conceive another, after 60-odd years, so simple, so effective, well, that's magic. With the profound effect she had on the hiker, on Josh, on Unit, well, explaining it was only going to end up being a disappointment, wasn't it? It's like casting someone as Helen of Troy. She's no longer the most beautiful woman in the world if you can see her and she looks like, well, whomever. Because we all have different tastes, and because once you see something, you compare it to all the other somethings and its flaws can only ever become apparent. But if I tell you Helen of Troy was the most beautiful woman in the world, and everyone behaves as if she's the most beautiful woman in the world, well, then you don't question it, unless she actually walks into the room. And just what could the 73 yards woman have said that would have satisfactorily paid off the terror she evoked? Nothing would have fulfilled our expectations, I don't think. What? Have you left the oven on? Can I talk to you about Jesus Christ? Join this group to see my AI recreations of Doctor Who missing episodes. What? As I say, I would never want to excuse lazy storytelling, but surely ghost stories rarely explain how the ghosts work. The fact that they're unexplained, well, that's part of the appeal. And with things remaining unknown, paranoia increases, and paranoia helps scary. And thanks to some clever and economical exposition from Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, Doctor Who viewers now know that since the Toymaker descended, the rules in the Whoniverse have now been bent a little, bent just enough to allow the supernatural in. The world of Doctor Who has more mystical foes now, thanks to the Toymaker, so that justifies the unexplained. Careful, though. I'm not sure, because every time we query an ending that is unsatisfactory, do we really just want the refrain, well, it's the Toymaker, innit? I don't think we'll be standing up and going, well, that's all right then. And I'm a big boy now, but the only time I really do remember being scared of Doctor Who on first viewing, if I'm honest, was during the first broadcast of 1980's State of Decay, about a month or so before my 7th birthday. This time, the baddies were vampires. And vampires, now they were definitely scary. They were the undead. There's something about death and revisiting those who've undergone it that I've always found creepy, and I think vampires also evoke myths and legends from old books which spoke of that place that I've already mentioned, the past. I've always found hints of the supernatural, therefore, creepier than, say, visitations from outer space. And as 73 yards astutely observes, trees are scary. Not just because they silhouette against the night sky, or because their branches rattle against windows at night, but because they're old. It's that pesky past again. Big, ancient trees are gnarled and indomitable, their wood more sturdy than our flesh, which resolves itself into a dew, whilst the arboreal remain there, erect and majestic. A really old tree would have been leant against by someone like you and me, someone who has lived and loved and lost and died, as the tree stands there, indifferent as they age and wither. And that same tree will do the same to us. What fleeting, puny saps it must think we are, as it inscrutably weathers the storms of time. So give me a tree, an old tree, and an old stone pub, with the darkness closing in outside, and I'll be scared. Throw in a dash of folk horror, and you've got me. A disparate group of characters, ready to be picked off one by one. Yep, pretty much my perfect Doctor Who, and the kind I'm most likely to be scared by. Reminiscent of another fright fest from my youth, John Carpenter's The Fog. Mist, lights, midnight, knocking. Nightmares. Oh, and Latin helps too, doesn't it? It speaks of times long ago and people long dead. Everyone who spoke Latin is dead. And so the past touches our awareness of our own mortality. And maybe that's why it's called 73 yards. Yards seem somehow more old world than other measurements. Although they are used legally for shorter distances in UK travel right now, they are something that speaks to ancient tradition. Yards are also used for ale quaffing and for cloth, reminiscent of old rituals and industry and dying crafts, but not, say, cyber cable or charging wires. And 73 yards is a much more evocative title than, say, 66.7512 metres or just under half a mile. And of course, the past, well, it's hard to touch. We can only access it through grainy pictures or woodcuts or old etchings, which gives it a detached, slightly haunting feel. If we had 4K HD footage of a 16th century, would it seem quite so scary? But because we don't have the detail, well, as we all know, that's where the devil hangs about, innit? And a lack of detail makes things scary, which is why that woman in the distance, slightly out of focus, indistinct, in 73 yards, is so disturbing. Too much detail, and the scary thing no longer becomes scary. She's an actress called Helen. In these days of sharp focus and HD, there's something unsettling about that which alludes to the murky, the not fully discernible, where our imagination, that great producer of nightmares, has to fill in the blanks. So there's definitely something about the past clashing with the present, or even with the future, that brings with it a very Doctor Who kind of dissonance. Having something ancient standing in a modern street, or something mythical floating through a spaceship, well, that's the scary version of the incongruous police box. The past throwing shade on the present and making it disconcerting. Old meeting new is scary, and Doctor Who's scariest episodes emphasise that, even in its modern incarnation, the devil in the impossible planet bringing gothic horror to a futuristic space base. The statues of Blink, old stone effigies bringing blank-faced terror to modern streets. A World War II gas mask on an innocent child, asking for its mummy. I love that scene in the first of those episodes mentioned, The Impossible Planet, in which the voice of Sutek, well, a devil by any other name, tells someone called Toby not to turn around. Can't think why that gets me. Well, I do, and actually, it's not all about, or indeed anything to do, with me. It's down to the simplicity of its ingredients. A purring voice. Temptation. Temptation. That's positively biblical, which is about as past as you can get. And that idea of being dared not to turn around. It reminded me of that other minimalist terror, The Ring, another spookfest, which, like 73 Yards, has a memorable-looking tree as a key part of its imagery. The Ring taps into that primal desire to do the forbidden, to picture the dangerous. Anyone who's held a child whilst walking over a bridge knows the crazy things that the brain does in order to make you hold on tighter. But never mind the Satan pit. Decades earlier, Doctor Who was messing with a colony of devils, one that later inspired a subpar school essay of mine, which has the effect of making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and did so when I was a grown-up. Nothing had quite prepared me for the first time I viewed that sequence in Fury from the Deep, in which, scarier even than Maggie Harris's wallpaper, Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill subjugate the poor woman at her dressing table by exhaling gas from their mouths. In the script it's not much, but the way it's shot, terrifying. Again, it uses the simplest of ingredients, in this case, the face of regular walk-on actor Bill Burridge, whose lanky frame and cadaverous physiognomy made him useful live scenery in various BBC programmes over the years. But here, in Fury from the Deep, he gets a rare credit and a chance to shine as the sinister Mr. Quill. By day, a mild-mannered refinery worker. By night, a servant of the sentient weed creature with phooey breath. It's an astonishing sequence which demonstrates how a good director can transform a relatively straightforward script request into something extraordinary, and it remains one of the best sequences in the whole of Doctor Who. No big effects, no scary monsters, a man, a mouth, and a camera. Breathtaking. Gas works. But black and white helps it as well, doesn't it? That helps it work. 73 Yards reminded me of another monochrome classic, Jonathan Miller's stark black and white rendering of Whistle and I'll Come to You from 1968. It's a spare and haunting piece with simple effects deployed with economy, and it's all the scarier for it. It has the foolish disturbance of an ancient thing. It has a mysterious figure in the distance, and it has an evocative Latin phrase to add to the fear. Like 73 Yards, Whistle doesn't seem to explain anything. It's a mood piece in which too many explanations would be ruinous. I do understand our need for some sort of elucidation, though. There needs to be rules. In the current iteration of Doctor Who, the gloves do seem to be off. As I mentioned earlier, the toy maker has changed the rules. Now, I'm intrigued by this, but it needs careful handling. Previously, Doctor Who has gone the Quatermass Nigel Neal route and provided scientific explanations for ancient magic and religious ritual. Russell T Davies seems less worried about this today, in the same way that vampire tales, well, they don't need to bother telling us why a stake through the heart kills them. Oh, it's the elemental composition of the stake's wood refracting the cadaverous force field around the plasmic antibodies of the creature's undead aorta, or something. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. But although 73 Yards was very much about mood and mystery, I do sympathise with those who aren't so forgiving of its militant obliqueness. If you think about it, if the shadowy figure had remained a mysterious entity to the end, then the inexplicit nature of its message might have been appropriate. But it turns out it was Ruby, who, as we know, is just a person, not a supernatural being. So how did she have that effect on people? Well, I guess I'll have to ask her, but I can't. And so I can understand those who feel that they shouldn't have to. But the key sentence there is, if you think about it. And I choose not to. Don't ask me why. I can't explain it. Ooh, aha. But the cotton thread of trust between audience and writer is delicate, so if these jaunts into I'll tell you laterville become a habit this year, I wouldn't be surprised if the denizens of Bad Wolf Studios see some figures in the distance. Doctor Who fans, they are them, after all, lurking ominously and making gestures, which might be hand signals of a rather less ambiguous nature than those of the scary lady. But as 73 Yards unfurled, I was quite prepared to have an episode that was midnight in Wales, and midnight, one of Doctor Who's most unsettling 40 minutes, never explains the threat, and is all the better for it. It had the enclosed space, a group of characters, a bang on the door. In fact, I saw loads of comments after the trailer, actually, saying, oh, it looks just like a rip-off of Midnight, whereas, in fact, that seems to me to have been the whole point. It was deliberate. We were led to believe that's what we were getting, and I, for one, was a willing follower. Look, I love Season 5, and that's pretty much the same story every week, so I'd have happily had another Midnight. But instead, along those 73 yards was a story that disembarked at midnight and changed direction to turn left before alighting at the sound of drums, after being held briefly in Stephen King's The Dead Zone. It meant I didn't know quite where the episode was going next, and that was disconcerting and thrilling. I really wasn't sure where we were heading, I just knew we were using imperial measurements to get there. Of course, our reaction to a Doctor Who story is based on many factors. We all come to an episode with our own history and stimuli. I doubt you'd just been watching The Snows of Terror before 73 Yards, nor did you, I suspect, have the pleasure of meeting the actress Amanda Walker just before Christmas. Oh, she was jolly and delightful, and so I dropped in as we were getting chatty. It's amazing, Amanda, how you've never done a Doctor Who. Oh, well, I just have, she said, but I can't tell you anything about it. But they were lovely and drove me there and back. So, I've been waiting for her to pop up in Doctor Who this year and was delighted when she did. And in such a key role, she played Old Ruby. Rather beautifully, she now enters the catalogue of married couples who have appeared in Doctor Who, because her husband, Patrick Godfrey, was in The Savages and The Mind of Evil. So to the list that includes Arturo Villar from the War Games and the lady whose leg grows back in The Doctor Dances, and Professor Crimpton from the War Machines and Miss Garrett from the Ice Warriors, and, Maggie Harris and Perkins from Fury from the Deep, we can now add Tor and Old Ruby. And actually, The Savages, in which Patrick Godfrey plays Tor, has another unusual connection with 73 Yards. Discounting The Edge of Destruction, as there are no guest characters in that, The Savages is the first Doctor Who story to feature no deaths. This is an unusual thing, and yet 73 Yards also features no on-screen casualties. How can a Doctor Who story be scary if no one dies? Surely it's only alarming if people are killed, if there's mortal danger. Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Yet the second story, in which there are no casualties, is one that gave me the goosebumps when I saw that remaining clip as an adult all those years ago. Fury from the Deep. Oh, no deaths, but a marriage. Which is often written up as among the very scariest of all Doctor Who adventures. And how many people quote The Empty Child as a chiller? Indeed, my not-wee ex, so much not-wee that she was a fairly committed poo-pooer of all things Who, and you don't get much more not-wee than poo, clasped my hand in fear as German expressionist Angles captured a gas-masked child in a hospital corridor. And yet, famously, everybody lives in that one. Just goes to show, you can chill the spines of your viewers without a high body count, and indeed, with no body count at all. In fact, you could almost say that the more people die in a Doctor Who story, the less frightening it is. It's the threat of death, the suggestion of its imminence. That's where real fear lies. So following the usual rules is not necessarily always to a Doctor Who story's advantage. A story with no death and no big explanations at the end sounds terribly unsatisfactory. But 73 Yards is not. Doctor Who is a show where minimalism can become an asset, and this episode had, oxymoronically, a surfeit of minimalism. Oh, it was full of it. Couldn't bloody move for minimalism. It isn't only in the imagery of the threat that 73 Yards demonstrates such an excess of great economy. Marty, who on the page must have no more than, 2 or 3 lines, and probably the same amount of stage directions, makes such an impact for a character with limited screen time. Kudos then to actress Sophie Ablett, but also to 73 Yards' beautiful storytelling frugality. Kill your babies, they say. No, not some forum trolling Russell T Davies 4 episodes ago, but to writers about being ruthless, about paring everything down. Marty didn't need to elaborate. He's a monster. That's all we needed to know about Roger ap William. And he's a monster with, get this, nukes. It's the war game all over again. And actually, Roger isn't unlike a vampire. Lestat-haired and dashing, pale-skinned and hypnotic. But he's a vampire with his finger on the button, tapping primal fears and those of the modern world. What could be scarier than Nosferatu with the destructor codes? If those codes were written in Latin, I guess. Can you imagine? But of course, Marty actually meant a different kind of monster. That word and her performance painted 1,000 abuses of power. We can fill in the blanks if we like. And, oh good, we can have a suggestion of sexual assault even in these woke days of Doctor Who, and in an episode that the Doctor isn't in. Oh, it'll start snowing next. Oh, come back, Vassor. All is forgiven. Now look, I'm 50 years old, and I don't really get scared of things these days. I mean, angry, sure. Helpless, definitely. But primal, hairs on the back of your neck scared? Not really. Only when I'm reminded of things from long ago, the things that scared me as a kid. That black and white bleakness of Whistle and I'll Come to You. Haunted eyes staring back at me from 100-year-old photos. Or dreams in which I'm trapped, claustrophobic. Now, they all give me shivers, but they're all things relating to my childhood. But even though they're available to watch, I haven't dared delve back to The War Game or Whistle and I'll Come to You. Maybe I'm worried I'll get scared again, or maybe I'm worried that I won't, that their power remains so long as they lurk more as indistinct recollections, more powerful than watching them up close and hearing what they have to say. They're scarier because they remain part of my childhood, a time that has been and gone, a time that is evidence of how quickly life flies by. Unlike Ruby and 73 Yards, as we get older, we don't need to be reduced to a montage of ending relationships for the years to move ever faster. And Doctor Who is, after all, a programme about time travel. But in real life, as you get older, time travels quicker and quicker and quicker, and you realise just how bloody fleeting it is. Not that long ago, I was young and fresh-faced and full of hope. I'm in a WhatsApp group with some old mates, and one of them yesterday put up some footage of an old production we were all in. I found seeing our enthusiastic, talented, hard-working, young selves, all full of energy and hope and expectation, staring out from that scratchy recording, rather moving. No, not old monochrome prints, but even 30-year-old videotape now has an archaic damage to it, an indistinctness about it, that makes it its own kind of gateway to the past. And none of us are dead. But the people we were then, we will never be again. And they're there, slightly out of focus, slightly askew echoes of us, versions of ourselves that will never be again. Us, but not us. And I found that, as I say, very moving, but scary too. A kind of terrifying melancholy. The same kind of melancholy evoked by a lone figure in the distance. I'm currently going through my own glasses on the face to indicate that I'm in a different period of my life now phase. But in the blink of an eye, I'll be older. I'll be really old. I'll be waving the TARDIS goodbye, my timeline at an end. What 73 Yards tells us, God, and I'm 73 in only 23 years' time. Yeah, what that tells us is that, like life, in the great scheme of things, it's no distance at all. It's not the past, it's not the ancient, the fusty, that scares me so much anymore, I don't think. It's the future, because it looms there, ominously, and eventually it'll do something that kills me. And all that will remain of me is a distant memory in the corner of someone's mind. Images, records, reminders. But not actually me. Just a shadow. The past meeting the future, well, that's so scary because, well, it's birth and death, isn't it? And the closer the future gets, the sooner we will be in the past. And that's why Ruby had to be the woman. Because what really haunts us is ourselves. Yes, the real horror of 73 Yards isn't the dead coming back to haunt us. It's that all too quickly, one day, we will be that ancient, barely discernible shadow in the distance, unable to speak, or be understood, or contacted any more by our loved ones. We'll be scarcely perceptible ghosts. Now that is frightening. Thanks for listening to Indefinable Magic. Tonight's episode, Fear Herself, after 73 Yards, was written and presented by me, Toby Haydock. The podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson, and the music was specially composed by Dominic Glynn. I would like to thank the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Peter Burns, James Curray Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Stephen Moffat, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, El Pandras, Jason Gorman, Siobhan Galichon, Paul Harris, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Joe Llewellyn, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Rick Moran, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matti Cirillo, Frank Shales, Andrew and Lisa, Kat Armitage, John Arnold, Kevin Ashelford, Luke Atkins, James Bell, David Bickley, Will Brooks, Gary Byrne, Robin Bland, Robbie C., Alex Kafajoglu and Ian K. McLachlan. If you enjoy these podcasts, then please consider becoming a patron, which you can do at patreon.com/Toby Haydoke, where for as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases. All the podcasts come out earlier for patrons. You also get bonus material. You get an exclusive podcast all to yourself, exclusive monthly AMAs, pictures of my dog, and behind-the-scenes glimpses at the many Blu-ray extras that I take part in and documentaries that I make. The odd interview is placed there as well. There's usually 3 or 4 releases per week, so plenty of bang for your buck, and you can get 10% off that buck, whichever tier you are on, if you sign up for a year in one go. You can also support these podcasts without committing to anything by making a one-off donation at kofi.com/Toby Haydoke, or you can go the non-financial route, which is totally understandable, and I'm simply very grateful to you for listening to these things in the first place. But if you enjoy them, I'd love it if you could go to iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere on the internet where you can say nice things and give these 5-star reviews and ratings, because that helps to tweak the algorithms and make these noticeable to the many people out there looking for Doctor Who content who may have not availed themselves of the opportunity to listen to this stuff, and I'd love it if they would. I'm on social media at Haydoke Podcasts, for X/Twitter for these podcasts, at Toby Haydoke on the same platform, which has a lot of my other non-Doctor Who related stuff. I'm not just the Doctor Who guy, you know. I'm also the Quatermass guy, and I'm a working comedian. I'm a stand-up comic and an actor, and I hope I do other exciting things outside of the world of archive, cult television, and sci-fi that you might like. If you've bothered to listen this far, you might well. I hope so. I also have a page on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram at toby.haydoke. And my comedy night, Excess Malarkey, which is in Manchester every Tuesday night, is followable at Excess Malarkey on Twitter, and also that has a Facebook and an Instagram as well. Semper distans.